Mr. Diamond, you seem to be inhabiting a slightly parallel universe, because you talk about the culture of Barclays as if that's the thing that saved Barclays. In fact, that's the thing that is the problem. Surely you must realise how enraged people are at the criminality, as well as you talk about reprehensible behaviour. It's actually criminality. And certainly there's a lot of talk that you yourself have been so unapproachable, and that's part of the reason for this. We also know that the absolute motivation for those traders prior to the financial crisis was their own personal gain, presumably because their own personal reward was only linked to the profitability of their own book and not linked to the profitability of the bank. I mean, what would you say to that?
In terms of the facts, which is the question?
Okay. Do you live in a parallel universe to the rest of the UK?
Andrea, I'm just going to say it again. The behavior when it came up, it was between 2005 and 2007 primarily. There were a few instances after that. There have been none since the investigation started. Andrea, it's wrong. It's reprehensible. It makes me angry. It makes me disappointed.
Okay. Well,
and it puts a stain, particularly coming out in this way, it puts a real stain on an organization. This
yes,
was
it does.
14 traders, Andrea. We have a couple of thousand traders.
Can we just go on to that? Because I do want to focus on the criminality, so not the issues of the financial crisis, but the actual criminal behaviour. The CFTC says that took place between mid-2005 and late 2007, and then sporadically afterwards, so certainly into 2009. And there are 173 separate recorded requests for rate fixing to be done, either up or down, plus 58 for Euribor, 26 for Yen LIBOR, and 11 requests coming from ex-Barclays traders who are now at other banks asking the Barclays submitters to fix rates on their behalf. So when you say it was limited to a small group of traders, clearly there was a significant amount of collusion going on.
Well, they were not looking to fix rates. They were looking to impact the LIBOR.
No, but can you answer that question?
But it's equally wrong. It's wrong.
So do you agree, though, that this isn't a tiny issue that's limited to a small group of rogue individuals? This is actually collusion on something of a grand scale, and time will tell how grand it was. I mean, what do you have to say about those individuals and the fact that they were incentivised, allowed to be incentivised, simply to worry about the profitability of their own book, to the extent that ex-Barclays traders, who presumably had some prior loyalties from the rate submitters, were actually able to persuade them to advantage them when they'd left the group? What does that say about the culture at Barclays?
The behavior was appalling.
But it's
behavior
not.
was absolutely appalling, and as soon as we knew it, it has been eradicated. And many of the traders, when we discovered this, some had already left, and some were removed immediately. So when it was clear that there was this behavior, it was dealt with immediately.
And how many have gone to prison?
I can't go back and change that,
how many
but
have
I
gone to
can deal
prison?
with it. And there will be, I understand, there will be follow-up criminal investigations on certain individuals.
And you would support that?
Well, it's not up to us, but we're certainly not going to stand in the way of it.
Okay, so let's go then to the process by which this sort of activity could have been passed up through the bank. Can you tell us, where did you sit during the period of 2005 onwards? Where was your desk? Did you have a desk on the dealing room floor in the fixed income department at any time during that period?
No.
So you've never sat there. So did you ever take part in the daily morning meeting on the dealing room?
I don't recall that. Certainly not since, if it was, probably in the late 1990s.
And were the morning minutes taken of the morning meeting?
I wasn't a part of the minutes of the morning meeting.
Okay, but would
I think
minutes
it was
have been
done
taken?
over the intercom, so I'm not sure there were minutes. There may have been.
But I think that's a very important point, because it would be very interesting to see whether the question of what we'd like LIBOR to look like today was ever discussed over the tannoy system, since it clearly doesn't seem to have been something anybody bothered to keep at all.
Well, if it had
secret.
been, it would have come out in this investigation. This is a very, very thorough investigation.
So if there were minutes taken and such an issue as falsifying LIBOR had come
looked at in the
across.
context of the investigation.
Okay, well that would be interesting to track down. So whose job would it have been in the dealing room to look for criminal activity? Whose function was it to be looking for criminal activity, and how did they do that?
That would fall within the area of compliance.
And how would compliance go about seeking out evidence of criminal activity within the dealing room?
Well, I'm not sure they were looking just for criminal activity, but they were looking for people complying with all the rules and regulations that we follow. And there's many ways from technology, from meetings, from training of people, from reviews of people. So it's quite pervasive, quite robust.
So compliance would sit in the dealing room or not?
I'm sure some of the people do.
Okay, so they would have been in a position to have picked up on this type of activity going on?
They didn't. So
they
that's
absolutely
the
never did.
And we've been very clear. This did not get above the supervisor level until we uncovered it. Once we uncovered it, we eradicated it, and it was wrong. I have no other way to explain it. We did not get a report above the supervisor of the desk level at any level of senior management in the firm. The second we did, the investigation was all over it, and the behavior was stopped.
Okay. Would a desk supervisor know and appreciate that falsifying LIBOR is an offence? Would they have been aware of that at the time?
Of course.
They would certainly have been aware of that. So desk supervisors would themselves have been entirely complicit in this fraudulent activity?
I think there have been cases where desk supervisors were aware, and in other cases where they weren't. And in those cases where desk supervisors were aware, they have been dealt with if it was clear, and it's done and dealt with. In some cases, we've asked them to either be suspended or stay on during the investigation with their compensation suspended if we needed them for the investigation, or if it wasn't clear and we needed the full due process. In each and every one of those cases, that due process is going on as we speak, and it began the moment that the investigation was published and announced.
So
I don't want to leave any impression about how sorry I am, how angry we are, how disappointed we are. What I'm saying in the context of Barclays, which is an amazing institution that I love, there are people doing things for their communities, for their customers and clients, 140,000 of them. And we're all impacted by these 14 traders. And it's not okay. It's not okay. No one is saying this was okay.
No,
it was wrong.
but the point I'm trying to get to is one about the attitude within the bank that allowed those 14 traders to do what they did.
I think
there has been. Can we just go back to the point about the desk supervisors? You're saying every desk supervisor would have been clear that falsifying LIBOR was wrong. They would have known that.
I would think that would be true.
You would require that. The bank would require them to know that that was wrong.
I would think that would be
and what action would they be required to take as desk supervisors if they knew that something was going on that was wrong? What was the procedure at the time if I, as a desk supervisor, knew something was illegal?
You keep coming on the same issue. It was wrong. It wasn't reported up. It should have been reported to compliance.
No, but I'm trying to understand what's the procedure that they didn't follow, that they should have followed to raise that hire that didn't happen. What was the actual procedure? Can you point to it in the Barclays compliance manual?
I don't have the manual with me, but I'm sure it's both compliance and to their boss.
And so they would have been actually openly required to raise that to a higher level. And so it would be very helpful to know who they should have raised it to and which part of the Barclays organisation that would have then gone through to get to the board.
Sorry, Andrea, that's very simple. It's compliance.
Just through compliance?
Well,
so not
also
through the Treasury
to the boss,
Committee.
but I think in terms of a supervisor level, the responsibility to inform their boss, but also responsibility to inform compliance. But I think there's no dispute there.
Okay, so effectively you would confirm again that this was people not doing their job?
In cases where that happened, they were not doing their job and they're being dealt with. And I want to make for the committee to know this again. It has been difficult to have some of these facts out there because they're bad.
Of course, no, we understand that.
It impacts the reputation. It absolutely does, David. But I also want the committee to understand that there are aspects of this which are industry-wide, but this bad behavior, I'm not blaming on anyone. I blame it on these individuals, and they're being dealt with.
Okay. What steps have you taken now, in light of the clearly openly fraudulent behaviour, to look at other possible areas within the bank that could also be subject to fraudulent behaviour?
Two things I would say. First of all, I was gratified when I got the final report, very gratified, that the fact that we didn't wait to get this report was recognized by the Department of Justice who says that our systems...
No, I'm sorry, can you answer the question? Which other areas have you looked at?
Improved.
Mr. Diamond, which other areas within the bank have you looked at where there may have been fraud?
It's been many years since this happened, and you can imagine how many different audits.
For example, Mr. Diamond, are you concerned that possibly the gilt-edged market has been in some way fixed by Barclays traders? Have you examined whether there was any potential for them to rig market auctions or other rate fixings within financial services? Have you examined those areas?
That would be a regular part of our audit cycle, yes.
But as indeed would LIBOR fixing, wouldn't it? That would have been a regular part of your audit cycle. And yet you didn't spot this for years.
Yes.
So, but you didn't spot the LIBOR manipulation.
But it was the
years.
behavior. It was the behavior before the submission was put in.
What I'm asking you is, in light of the fact that your audit failed to notice for several years that there was fraud and corruption going on under your noses and very openly, have you now looked at other areas of the bank to see whether something like that has been going on there for years too?
Of course.
You have. So this could not happen again. There would not be any merit in an inquiry into whether other parts of Barclays have been fraudulently fixing.
Well, I think the way to do that is to start by going through our processes and our controls and our audit reports. And if someone wasn't happy with those and made suggestions that there's other places to look, of course we would do it. But that's part of the overall process. Andrea, one of the things looking back, and this is, by the way, not meant as an excuse. The behavior was abhorrent. So I'm not making an excuse, but I do think context is helpful. It's interesting in Barclays because David and you have focused so much on the culture. And I understand that because there was such bad behavior. The rate setters in Barclays have been many of them have been here for 25 and 30 years. This is a core part of the Barclays UK business that Jesse was asking about earlier. This wasn't something that was created recently. So many of these people have been in their jobs for quite a while. The second thing I would say, and it's important to have it in context, is it was not perceived by the industry to be high risk. And part of that was for so many years the spreads were all so tight before we saw this that it wasn't considered high risk.
But you're just damning the culture even further, because effectively what you're saying is that the level of complacency, this had been going on for years, this is people who've been there for years.
I didn't say it was going on for years. I said that
you're saying the people have been there for years.
Audits are often based on where we see the risk to be highest. And the risk in the area of rate setting exploded during the financial crisis.
I'm not talking about the financial crisis, though, am I? Specifically, I'm talking about the criminality in the heydays before the financial crisis. I want to be very clear about that. And the key point here isn't it, that individuals were remunerated just to look after number one, even to the point that even people who left and went to other banks could still persuade someone for the price of a bottle of Bollinger to help their book. This wasn't about the banks, this was about absolute corruption within individuals within Barclays, and it was helped by the attitude within the bank that people were allowed to be remunerated vast sums for the profitability of their own book, regardless of what that did to the bank.
I think you take the conclusions way too far, but I am not going to defend the behavior of that group of people. The behavior was wrong. Their compensation was not based on just their own book. But I'm not going to disagree with you, Andrea, that behavior was wrong. And it's been eradicated, it's been dealt with, but there's no excuse for the behavior.